In January of 2019, my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was in a completely inoperable part of the brain, and was told me had 6 months to live. He stuck it out and died in October, 3 months longer than he was expected to. He was always positive, and decided a few weeks after his diagnosis that he would write letters for our daughters for significant events in their lives. My husband was my soulmate, and the past few months have been difficult knowing I've lost him. We have 2 daughters, Mia, who is 21, and Imogen, Imi, who is 19. All 3 of us have become a lot closer since their dad's death, and we've all really struggled. My husband and I were together since we were children. Got married when we were 18, and we were approaching our 20th wedding anniversary when he passed. In February of this year, Mia got married to a boy she's been with for about 6 years. I absolutely love her husband, and he's been incredibly supportive during all of our grief. My husband wrote a letter for Mia to open on her wedding day. It's worth noting that my daughters were unaware of these letters. It was my job to give them to our daughters. Her wedding day comes around and I just can't bring myself to give her the letter. I read it and just wanted to keep it to myself. I had his handwriting and his words, and it felt like he was there, and I couldn't bear the thought of giving that up yet. I was fully intending on giving her all the other letters as the events happened. Last week, Mia and her husband bought their first home together. They'd been living at our home since they got married, and so had a lot of stuff to pack and move to their new house. Mia asked me where her important documents were, passport, birth certificate, etc. So I told her they were in my top drawer of my dresser in my bedroom. The only letter that was in there was the one I was meant to give her on her wedding day. The rest were hidden away. She immediately recognized his handwriting, and of course it was addressed to her, so she read it and broke down. She came and found me and started screaming at me, asking how I could be so selfish. I didn't really know what to say apart from the fact that I wanted to keep it and she could take a picture of it. Both my daughters called me an asshole and are convinced I'm keeping them from a load of their dad's stuff. My mom is a huge Harry Potter nut. She and my dad actually met in a Harry Potter IRC, like Discord but for old people. In the early aughts got married, had kids, and from day one decided to embarrass us for life by naming us after some Harry Potter and Star Wars characters. It's honestly been hell. I have a stupid name, and since we were little my parents have forced stuff like Harry Potter, Star Wars, Marvel movies, etc. down our throats. Everything is about dragons and magic and blah blah blah. I'm so sick of it. Every birthday, every holiday, everything is just organized around fandom. So just like every Christmas, the days leading up to Christmas we have to sit down every night and watch Harry Potter movies. I can usually get away with knitting or drawing on my iPad during this, but this year my mom was like, let's just have a technology and distraction-free night every night. I arranged to go over to my friend Missy's house instead for like 2 nights. Missy's family is normal and likes things a normal amount. My mom got really mad and started talking about how it's a family tradition and how I'm basically rejecting her, and went on her whole thing about how you wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Harry Potter. I finally had it and just yelled, I don't like Harry Potter. I don't like Star Wars. I couldn't help it. I started crying because I was just so frustrated, because everything always has to be about Harry Potter, this, Star Wars, that, and now that we're all older they started doing Game of Thrones. Everything is centered around some kind of movie or TV show or book series. Just once is I want my family to band around something that doesn't have to do with media or these nerdy things. We live in Utah where we have like 5 national parks, and even though I ask every year for my birthday, well, my sister called me saying that mom was angry and to just come home and to stop with the theatrics. I told her that I'm sick of having all this old nerd stuff crammed down my throat, and just once I want to have a normal time watching normal Christmas movies and not having to pause for lightsaber battles. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to, very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions. Through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night. Because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl" were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. 2 things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single, and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple, and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with. but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to, this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated. I met this guy about 18 months ago, and we've been together since. He knows about my employment history, and he said that he has no issue with it. Though he did ask me to tell his family the white lie I occasionally use on my CV and stuff, which is that I was a waitress. A month ago we found out that I'm 2 months pregnant. He says this is great news, and we should move in together. I assumed he'd be moving into my place because he rents his far smaller 1-bedroom flat while I own mine. And I have room for a baby's room while he doesn't. Also, I really don't want to leave my flat. It's my flat, I love it, I could see myself living here for the rest of my life. And I don't want to lose the security of owning a flat and have to go back to paying rent or a mortgage each month. However, he then said that he didn't want to move into my place, and said I should sell it and we buy a place together. I said that I like my place, it means a lot to me that I was able to buy it. And it represents years of working my arse off scrimping and saving. He then said that he understands all of that. But we should be living together by the time the baby comes, and he didn't want to live in my flat. I asked him why not. It's a great flat, it's central to everything, it's spacious, it's got room for all his stuff. There's a daycare in the building, run / owned by another tenant, and a school 5-minute walk away, the list goes on. And he said that he didn't want to live in a flat that was bought with stripper money. That really pissed me off, and I told him no. Way am I selling my flat, and that he never had an issue with my stripper money paying for this flat before now. I said I wasn't giving up the security of owning a home for someone who tries to make me feel ashamed about something I don't feel ashamed of. He said that his point is if I sold the flat then we could get a new place with the money from the sale. I said, wouldn't that still be stripper money? And he said that's different, and I asked how. He then said he was going back to his place because I can't talk to you when you're in this state. He's gone back to his flat now, and he's texted me saying I'm overreacting / irrational, and I need to think of this realistically, rather than emotionally. He says he wouldn't feel right raising a child in my flat knowing how I purchased it, and selling back / moving is the best idea of all of us, not to mention the fact he isn't on the deed because it's my place and it would never feel like our place because of this. I feel I might be the arse because I get why he might feel like it's just my place, and I feel I'm being too rigid in a time we need to work together. Plus I spoke to my sister and she sided with him, so 2 out of 3 people think I'm in the wrong here. I dumped him. There was a whole conversation, and during the conversation he said he didn't want to be a parent if I wasn't willing to do everything he wanted, including sharing a house back / deed, plus staying together. Also, at the start of the conversation I said what a few people suggested, which was that I'd be willing to sell and split the house with him, provided he paid 50%, and he got very, very angry. Very, very quickly. He also said a few other things, how it's all going to pan out just yet, but it looks like I'm going to be a single mother,